And welcome to Untethered with Jen Liss, the podcast that's here to help you break free, be you, and unleash your inner brilliance. I'm your host, Jen, and in this episode, we're going to talk about the art of noticing and how winning the war for your own attention can spark joy in the everyday. Let's dive in. Hey there, unicorn. It's Jen. Welcome back to the podcast. Today on the podcast, we have author, journalist, and educator, Rob Walker. Rob is the author of a book that came out in 2019, The Art of Noticing. He's also the author of many, many other things. He is currently a contributor to Fast Company. He has written for the New York Times in the past. He's written many, many things, including his own fabulous newsletter, which you can check out in the show notes. We talk about it here in this episode, but it's Rob's book, The Art of Noticing, that had a tremendous impact on my own life. So we talk about why that is. And he talks about this concept of the art of noticing, which is one that I work with my clients very frequently on, as well as when I do breathwork. I support people in noticing the things that are in their bodies, the sensations, the feelings, the thoughts, having the awareness of themselves. So we're going to dive really deep into a lot of these things. And he's just such a delight in the way that he speaks and thinks. And he thinks so creatively and differently. And I just encourage you to really take in this episode and consider for yourself what might beginning to be present and simply noticing the world around me, noticing my own thoughts, noticing my own behaviors. How might that support me in my own untethering so that I can become the radiant unicorn who I was born to be? So I can live a life that when I am on my deathbed at 120 years old, right? When you've biohacked yourself to being 120, 160, 180, you can look back and feel that you have lived your most fulfilling, most magical life. So without further ado, I welcome the great Rob Walker. Hi, Rob. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, how you doing?
So good. I have an icebreaker for you that I'm excited to ask you. It's one of the most important questions in the world to ask you. And I know that you're a fan of icebreakers. My icebreaker question, all of my most important questions have to do with food. And is chili a soup?
Is chili a soup? I'm going to... So I've never heard a yes or no icebreaker quite before. I'm going to say no. No, it's not a soup. What do you think?
Why?
I like really thick chili. I like chili that's so thick you eat it with a fork. And I feel like if you can eat it with a fork, it's not soup.
Does it make it a chowder?
You stumped me. I'm a Southern boy. I don't know anything about chowder. I don't know what chowder is.
Genuinely, I don't really know anything about chowder either. Okay, thanks for allowing me to go down that rabbit hole. You're right. Most icebreakers are not.
You made me hungry for chili. So
there you go. It's perfect. As I'm originally from the Midwest, and it is officially chili season, so it seemed like an appropriate question.
Okay, good.
It makes you think, though. Why is chili not a soup? Why is it not? What is it? Its own category? I don't know. Anyway, that we're not only here to talk about chili.
No.
We're here to talk about you and your. So, I invited you to come on the podcast because a friend of mine gave me your book a few years ago, and this book and one particular thing in this book shifted so much for me. And it's the color walk. So your book is called The Art of Noticing, and you teach in this book all of these different creative exercises for helping us bring ourselves into the present. And one of those things is this color walk. And so I would go on a color walk at your suggestion every day, and I would go out and I would see certain colors. And I noticed so much in the world around me. And I used to go live and actually do these color walks with people. And it was just such an amazing experiment. And it really just opened my eyes to all of the things in the world that I was not seeing around me. And that is not the only creative exercise that you have in this book. There are tons of them. I don't know if you know the exact number, but there's a lot. 131, which is listed right on the front of the book.
Cover, yeah.
131 of them, one of which I am obsessed with. And why is this something that you are so passionate about? I myself experienced it with this single exercise and became passionate about that single exercise. But why is the concept of noticing something, why is noticing things your thing?
Sure. So first, I want to thank you for highlighting the color walk, which is one of these ideas. Just to be clear, it's like, okay, go for a walk, and instead of looking at your phone, pick a color in advance, purple, and look for all the purples that you can find, and pay attention to that. So that's a very simple ask, right? It's not some complicated thing like learn to meditate and go to a retreat. Like you can just do that right now. You could do it the next walk you take. And this speaks directly to your bigger question, which is that, I mean, there were a bunch of strands that led to the book. So I'm going to drastically oversimplify. But I was, like many people, concerned about this war for my attention and how much my attention was being rated, not just by companies and advertising and media things, but also, good stuff. My friends posting stuff on social media who I cared about and wanted to pay attention to. But it was just leaving me very little room for engaging with the world. And I held on to the idea that I think engaging with the world is a pretty important thing. The color walk, while I can't say it was at the center of the enterprise, is a great example of just a very simple tactic for re-engaging with the world around us and surprising yourself in an authentic way and just taking control of your own attention and seeing where that leads. Because one of the ways I frame it is spend some time looking at things that you want to look, and it's not just about looking, it's other senses too, but paying attention to things that you want to pay attention to, not stuff that someone else wants you to pay attention to, because that's what dominates our perception right now, is looking in the direction that we're being encouraged to look by someone or something. And sometimes there are good reasons to pay attention to what everyone else is paying attention to. Like if there's a hurricane coming, for example, I'm not saying totally tune out, but it doesn't leave much room for individuality and for originality and for engagement. And that's what I think is really important. And that I teach, and I was seeing this a lot with students where I was concerned that they were too tuned in to what everyone else was paying attention to, and we're losing individuality in that process. So that's a roundabout way, but I just wanted to make sure I really thanked you for bringing up the color walk, because it's a great sort of gateway drug style exercise that's very easy. Anyone can do it. You can do it take a 15-minute break at work, walk around the block, see all the reds you can see. And what's the payoff? There doesn't have to be a payoff in the sense of like, oh, and therefore go back and start a company or something. It's just something that will shift the way you look at the world. And I think that there's some enjoyment and some payoff to that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And something that you said in there, I'm personally passionate about, which is surprise. And I love to be surprised. I love to be delighted. And with all of our attention just being constantly, it's like we're not experiencing a lot of just surprise and delight. And we have so much expectation around, like we pull up a video and we have expectation around what we're going to get, or maybe we don't even give it enough time to surprise and delight us. And when I'm doing that color walk, it's happening naturally without me trying. But sometimes, here's what's interesting. I've done it enough, and I hope listeners will go give this a shot sometime on your next walk, or even just sitting around you in the room. You can do a stationary color walk as well, just walking your eyes around the room. But I will find myself starting to expect it, and then it's less fun. So it's like constantly bringing myself into the present and just being like, it's okay. Just let it come to you. Let it come to you.
No, it's true. And it's a good insight that that shift from surprise to expectation, I think, is at the heart. I'm not an expert on this kind of thing, but I think that's at the heart of a lot of these, quick video sites and things like this, where it goes from, wow, that was a shocking thing of seeing that guy jump off that cliff, to like, it just feeds you one after another of the same variations on the same thing until it's like an addiction, something. Anyway, I don't want to get too caught up in, I'm not super anti-tech. I shouldn't make it sound that way. I'm more coming from where you're coming from, which is it's an opportunity, it's a way of engaging, and it's a way of sort of more actively participating in this process yourself, and a more authentic level of surprise, because there is no ghost in the machine. It's just the world. And in some ways, the thing like the color walk, the more familiar the neighborhood is to you, the more powerful it can be, because you think you've seen everything in your neighborhood. But if you shift your paradigm, give yourself a slightly different focal strategy, you'll see things, not just the colors, but you'll notice other things that you had never noticed before. Or at least that's what I think.
How can something like that be honing that? Now, you teach students, you teach designers, that's part of your job. You're also a writer, and you probably do a lot of things in your life. But why is that learning how to focus and learning how to notice things? How can that help not just designers, but all people in their everyday life? What is the benefit of beginning to notice?
Yeah, there are a couple ways of answering that. So I'll go in sort of reverse order. With the students, one of the main messages is that the class I teach for the School of Visual Arts is actually called Point of View. So that's what it's trying to help these sort of graduate level, but young designers not just identify, but learn to talk about where they're coming from and why they're doing what they're doing. And that obviously would apply. Having a point of view applies in many fields, especially creative fields. And my concern at a certain point was that I felt that with some students, because of the way the culture works now, if there was something they were interested in and it didn't seem to be of interest to the culture at large, it didn't seem to be, let's say, a trending topic, a hashtag thing, then they would think, well, I guess no one else is I'm paying attention to this, but no one else is, so I guess it's not that important. And I think the opposite is true. I think that's the most important. The things that only you notice are the things that make you you. So I think that's a pretty important lesson on a professional and personal level. The second layer to that is that if you are in a creative field or doing creative endeavor, and I would define that broadly to be, you could be a manager, there's creativity involved in that. You could be a coach, you could be an artist, you could be an entrepreneur. Whatever it is you're doing, there's no innovation without first noticing something that someone else overlooked, that everyone else overlooked. Like that's the beginning spark of identifying a problem that needs to be solved, or identifying a positive thing that needs to be celebrated that's being under noticed. So that's the second thing, is that I think there's no creativity or innovation without noticing. The third and final thing is, I think, and this is really the most important one. I said that I was going in reverse order. I'm not going in reverse order. This is the top. This is the top of the heap. Is that it's a better way to live, whether you are taking it as a means to an end or not, whether your engagement with the world leads to some specific outcome or not. Engagement with the world is just superior to the absence of engagement with the world. And I'm not breaking any new ground by saying that. It's just an idea that gets kind of mystified sometimes and complicated by, do you need to go to a 2-week meditation retreat to engage with the world? Look, I'm all for the 2-week meditation retreat. I've never done one, but I would. But I think that sometimes we set up these barriers around that kind of engagement that are unfortunate, because I don't think it's that complicated. And I think one of the most important messages of this project, the book and the newsletter, is to demystify and tear boundaries down and say, like, look, and that's why I was so happy that you brought up the color walk, because literally someone could do that while they're listening to us, could start a color walk. It's easy. You don't have to read a book first. You don't have to subscribe to a newsletter first. You just go start engaging right now. And I think that that's just really important.
Yeah, that's such a great point, that engaging directly with the world around you. We feel like we are, though. There's actually this concept that you shared in the book that somebody had mentioned of polyconsciousness, I believe, where it's like you're connected to everything around you, but you're not connected to yourself and what's here and now. And I feel like with this podcast, when just in my own life, what I've experienced in the past few years, I call the untethering. I call it, it's like I'm just untethering from all these things that had my attention, what people caring so much, what people think, what is expected, the end result, like all of these things that are out here, and coming back here to like, what do I really want? What is actually enjoyable to me? These are some of the questions I ask my coaching clients, like basic questions that we can't even answer. What lights me up? What brings me joy? What am I feeling right now in this very moment right here? And what I guide people through, Rob, I use your phrase and give you credit all the time for this, which is why I'm just like so delighted that you're here right now, because I say, start practicing the art of noticing in your life. Notice what's bringing you joy. And it's like we naturally start to untether. What I'm seeing and experiencing is that people begin to, what I call, untether from all of that, like that polyconsciousness state, if I'm using that phrase even correctly.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you've picked up on a really important theme that's not always obvious to people in the book, which is that there is a bit of a journey involved in this, or there can be. If you start with simple things like the color walk and engaging in the world, and if you start by getting a better sense of being in touch with the environments that you're moving through all the senses, and that includes the people in those environments. The book has a section about connecting with it's noticing is about the icebreaker idea comes from the importance of connecting with other people, but where it lands is really in noticing in an inward way, and what you just were saying, which is noticing what are the things you really respond to, what are the things you really care about. The only way to get there is through building these muscles that are being atrophied by living in a constant state of reaction, which is what too much of us are doing right now. Like, it's impossible to completely tune out the world, right? Like, you can't say you have to deal with everyone else. You have to deal with external stimuli, and you can't have the same, you'll never be able to achieve the same kind of total sense of wonder and awe that a child had, because you're not a child and you've seen a lot. So there is some work involved, and kind of making that work fun and accessible is sort of the mission. And I think when you build those muscles, the point ultimately isn't to become an expert like Sherlock Holmes in noticing every tiny change in your neighborhood. It's to get better at discernment about what you are responding to and what means something to you. And it is ultimately, it sounds sort of contradictory at first, but it's ultimately a very inward process, or a very inward set of exercises. It just takes a little while to get there.
Okay, well, if we're practicing those inward exercises and we start beginning to practice some of these things that you teach and beginning to discern a little bit better, what is this is kind of like a funny question, because we're like, it's about the inward journey, but that as human beings, we're also focused on the result. Like, what is the outward things that we could start to see manifest for us on the outside as we begin to practice that art of noticing in our own lives? Or what have you even experienced yourself?
Yeah, well, so this goes back to the earlier set of potential, and I have to give some sort of leeway to the individual here in terms of where you're coming from. Like, if you are focused on some sort of specific creative project, or the idea that you want to be more creative, then that's a perfectly reasonable goal to set for yourself. If that's less important to you and you're just, at a more beginning stage of the journey where you're trying to figure out what it is, like, what is important to me? What do I care about? And I know it sounds sort of crazy to say that, but I think it's very easy to lose track of that. And that's when, and there's stuff in the book about this, about journaling and things like this. But one of the clear examples is, and this is something that I took from The comedian Mike Birbiglia, storyteller, he's an interesting. He tells this anecdote about making an appointment with himself because he felt like his very creative person. Obviously, he's done a number of one man shows and specials and albums and things like this. But he felt like he had gotten to the point where he was spending all his time making time for other people, and he had a very packed calendar and very efficient at it, and realized that he wasn't doing the things that were important to him. So that's a question you can ask yourself. What am I not doing that's important to me? But in his case, he solved it in part by literally putting a thing on his calendar. You have an appointment at 2:00 Friday with your own mind at the cafe, whatever. That kind of full on commitment to, like, that's not an answer, but it's the beginning of a real attempt to question, what is it that I want? And that helps guide how you proceed further from there. But that's kind of how it plays into the opening gambit of playing out in the way you want it to help you specifically.
Yeah, that's really helpful example for us to all think through. I'm really curious, Rob, what is, if I can ask this question, what is really important to you right now? If you made an appointment with yourself and you really asked that question, like, what is important to me right now? What is kind of drawing your curiosity at this moment? One of the things you say in the book is just like, follow your curiosity and joy. So I'm curious what you're curious about.
Yeah, it's certainly a fair question. It would be not cool of me to dodge that. There are a number of things, as there always are. So this is one of the challenges. So like step one is like, wow, I really need to make that appointment with myself to sort through the 5 things that I need to make an appointment with myself about. But the more honest answer is but prior to this book, did a lot of work around work. I was doing an advice column for the Times called The Workologist. And so since then, the pandemic happened, obviously caused a revolution in how we think about work. And obviously, I'm not the only person concerned with this or interested in this, but I am very interested in, and one of the reasons I'm happy to talk to someone like you is I am very interested in how these things intersect with general societal ideas about work going forward. Big questions about how do we think about ambition now? How do we think about, I hate to say work-life balance because it's such a beaten up phrase, but that's I really think, and that's, as you know, I have the newsletter. That's the direction I'm kind of wanting to push in. And you're kind of calling my bluff by asking me this question, because that's the subject that I need to spend time sitting back and thinking about hard. Like, how do I balance these things? You can hear in my answer my need to sharpen my answer.
Yeah.
But it is sincere. That's the subject that I'm most interested in, is how this, as I've talked about, I feel like it's very important to your day-to-day life, and it's very important to certain kinds of creative work. But I think there's also something to be said for other kinds of work, or the way we think about work more generally, because not everybody views work as a source of meaning, and that's okay. But I want to think about how we can make work as meaningful or as positive as possible for as many people as possible.
I love the way you phrase that. That's just, it's that I think a lot about this too. And my history, I don't think I shared with you, is that I worked in employee experience strategy for a while for a couple of big companies. And I think a ton about work and the things that we have done that have worked for people and haven't worked for people, and meditation. And I'm a breath worker. I help people to become present in their bodies with their breath. That's one of the things that I do. So it's like, there's something in this that I'm just constantly playing with and just so curious about. And so a lot of us are thinking about this, and a lot of the listeners too, we're all just questioning, like, what does work mean to me? Does it have to be this way? Is the way I've always done it the way, So, the more amazing, creative, brilliant minds we can have thinking about this and helping to propel all of us to question it, the better.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there's clearly such a need / opportunity in that realm that you just described, that there's there's just a lot that could be done, and you're helping do it, and it's on my mind. It's that's what I'll be making my appointments about.
Beautiful. Can't wait to read your newsletter and your articles and all of the amazing things that you're going to put out there. And by the way, I'm incredibly selective about the emails that I read. I read your every single one that comes out. I read all of so I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes so that everybody can go and read it, because you're just always thought-provoking things. And I even forwarded something from your email into my email a couple weeks ago. And so thank you. And I really encourage all the listeners, if anything that we've talked about today has piqued your interest at all, go and follow Rob's newsletter. Can I ask you one final question?
Of course. Thank you for the kind words about the newsletter. I don't want to make, I hope I'm not coming across like I'm advertising or anything, but
I will advertise.
It's such a part of my life now that every question comes up to, well, in the newsletter anyway, but yes, you can ask anything.
It's your life. It is part of who you are and what you do. And I will gladly advertise for anything that I absolutely love, just like completely shamelessly. So that's what's happening here. Unless on that subject, is there anything else that you'd like to share before I toss my final question, which is off of this field completely?
No, you can go in a new direction. I'm up for that.
Beautiful. This question I ask every single person who comes on the podcast: where do you see the magic in the world around you?
Wow. I think it's going to go back to, I'm going to kind of steal from you and your use of the word surprise earlier. And I mean, it is in the world. Where's the magic in the world around you? It's in the world around you. And it's in being open to surprise and being open to kind of, I guess, what I'll call everyday wonder. That sounds a little bit like a cliche. Things like the things that get me when I'm in the right frame of mind are things like the shadow of a bird that you sort of wouldn't have noticed if you hadn't been more tuned in to the world. Like, I did a post recently about things you'll never see again, which sounds really, intimidating, but actually that we see things all the time that we'll never see again that are kind of miraculous and amazing, a lizard jumping or something like that. And it's those things that when they catch me at just the right moment, when I'm on that I'm right on the edge of being cynical, distracted, irritated about something, walking the dog, and I'm not in the moment at all. I'm grinding my teeth about some petty encounter or work thing. And then some random thing happens. Like I said, a shadow of a bird. And it's like, oh yeah, that's kind of amazing. I need to get back to the world and realize that I know that sounds a little hokey, but that's the truth. So
I don't think it sounds hokey at all, but I'm like super hokey. So you know what came to mind as you're describing that? And it's probably because you said bird, but there was this time I was late to work and I had put my dog outside, and out of the corner of my eye, I see like a movement that was not a normal movement that I see. I turned my head. My giant 100-pound Samoyed dog leapt into the sky and snatched a bird right out of the sky. Like, I had no idea this dog could get that vertical, and I'll never forget it. It was one of the most surprising, weird moments that will never happen again. When you said moment, I cannot imagine that physically ever happening again. And I just happened to see it.
Yes, that's incredible. Yeah. So moments like that, I mean, and you don't even, it's not like the point of a moment like that isn't that, like, number one, I hope that keeps happening. Like, you don't really want that to happen over and over again. Or number two, I wish I had a picture of that. This is one of the things I wanted to say, is that sometimes don't take the picture or don't worry about the picture, because the thing that happens in your mind is your memory of it. And I know there's conflicting things about memory research, but like your memory of it is going to be much more powerful and much more meaningful than having something that you can share on Instagram. Don't worry about performing everything. I love that story. That's great. That's perfect.
It was an amazing moment. And I completely agree with you. One of the activities I'll often send people to do is go enjoy yourself and don't take a single picture. Just don't take it, just keep the phone away, So Rob, thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything that you shared. Really appreciate your time. And everyone, go check out the show notes, connect with Rob. Where can people find you best right now? The newsletter or otherwise?
Yeah, probably the newsletter is robwalker.substack.com. And I have a site, robwalker.net, but it's a little needs updating. So the newsletter is where I'm active these days. So.
Well, and people can find your articles online too. I read one that you wrote the other day for Fast Company or something, and you have a way of surprising and delighting people even in just your everyday writing. I think you'd said something like, it doesn't matter. You'd listed something, and then the last one you were like, yeah, that one wasn't actually true. It's like these little surprises that you put into your writing that I genuinely appreciate.
Yes. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Yes. The Fast Company. I do write a column for Fast Company, so I should plug them. Fastcompany.com. You can find me on there.
There you go.
But for this kind of stuff, I really appreciate talking to you. I had a lot of fun. And I want to put in a word for breath work because I hope I didn't say anything that, because sometimes people get a little intimidated by that idea. And I have done some of that at this point. And like I said, I think that the stuff I'm talking about is a very easy gateway drug kind of thing that can lead to exploring more advanced practices like good breath work, meditation, that have real benefits and payoffs that I'm all for. I'm just at the sort of training wheels level of getting people to start moving in that direction.
I think it's both. I think it's a both. From my perspective, it's a both and, because doing these little everyday things, that's so much fun. And then you can also do the more like serious work. It's like we can do both, and there's just so much benefit to doing both of them. And
couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. I'm just trying to expand the field.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much, Rob.
Okay, thank you.
Oh my gosh, isn't Rob just phenomenal? When I'm fangirling out about something, and at the same time with incredible good reason. So if you are somebody who desires to be more creative, which is generally all of us, we are all creative beings, and we can use our creativity to improve the world, to change the world in so many amazing ways. And so often we are just allowing our attention to be just spread so thin on so many things. And we don't have it right here at home with ourselves and with our own creativity, those little things that you notice. I love what Rob said about this. Those little tiny things that you notice that you don't think anybody else is noticing, they're not, because that's your magical gift. That is your gift. That is your own specific art of noticing. And when you notice something that could be improved, you have the opportunity to do so in your unique way. So consider that for yourself. Take yourself on a color walk to remind you what to do with the color walk. You go on a walk, choose a color. Here's how I do it. I don't always have the color when I start my walk. I just begin walking. And then as I start walking, I notice something like, oh, a red cardinal. And so then from then forth, I will notice the color red. Or if I'm walking along and I look down and I'm like, that's an interesting color of gray on this little spot on the sidewalk. And then I will notice that particular color of gray. It's really fun to play with certain shades. I have also expanded sometimes this color walk into textures, noticing like the texture of the clouds today, and then seeing if you notice that same kind of shape or texture on other things as you continue to walk. So please engage this activity. I would love to hear how it goes for you. Try it once, try it twice, come back and report to me what you think. You can send me an email anytime, hello@jenliss.com. You can reach out to me on Instagram. You can also, if you go on a color walk, take a little screenshot of this episode or take a little screenshot of your color walk and tag me. I would absolutely love to see your color walk. I'm Untethered Jen on Instagram. Give me a tag. I would absolutely love to see you going out on your color walk. Thank you so much for listening. It truly means the world to me that you would listen to this episode and take precious time out of your day to enjoy a little bit of creativity. Thanks again. You just keep shining your magical unicorn light out there for all to see. I'll see you next time.